Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Hargs, and I'm the Executive Director of HOTT, also known as Houses Opening Today Toronto. Thank you so much for joining in to watch our panel discussion today. If you're not familiar with us, HOTT is a charitable not-for-profit organization. We develop and operate affordable rental housing, and we also provide a range of support services for our most vulnerable residents, many of whom were previously homeless. We are totally passionate about the work that we do and the people that we serve. As part of our work, we feel it's important to advance discussion about creating and maintaining affordable housing in Toronto. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly changed everything and intensified our need for such discussion and action. So we have invited a panel of 3 individuals who are also passionate about affordable housing and who are leaders in the housing sector to come and share their insights with us. Before the panel members are introduced to you, it's important to acknowledge that we are on the treaty lands and traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, the traditional meeting place of Toronto is still home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island, and we acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people and accept our responsibility to honor all our relations. I'm now going to hand over control to our moderator, Michelle German, who is joining us from Woodgreen Community Services, where she is the Vice President of Policy and Strategy. Michelle is a dedicated housing advocate, working hard towards building a more equitable city, and we are delighted that she has agreed to moderate our panel. Hi, Michelle. Welcome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to moderate this panel tonight. We have an amazing group of guests with us. We have Valesa Faria. She has 15 years of experience working at the city and Toronto community housing. It's basically her job to make sure affordable housing gets built. She's the director within the Housing Secretariat, and she works to build partnerships and trust and move things through the system. And we're very happy to have her. We also have Marlene Coffey. She leads the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association and brings a really interesting economic development background from many years of work all over Ontario. And she's really brought the association to new places to explore how to leverage its collective expertise, how to nudge the system in important ways, and how to support each other in this exciting era of housing. Welcome, Marlene. We also have Joshua Bénard. He's a vice president of real estate development and Habitat for Humanity. But before coming to Ontario, he did a lot of affordable housing development in Alberta. One of the cool things about him is he was Alberta's one of top 40 under 40, which probably makes him blush, but I'm sure it makes his mother very proud. But since coming here, he's worked with Habitat for Humanity on rethinking different approaches, pushing the envelope in different ways. So collectively, we have 3 amazing guests who know a lot about housing. They've tried a lot of things, they've failed, they've succeeded. And today we're gonna have a conversation about what's going on these days, what their opinions are and what their perspectives are on what's possible. So welcome. So we'll start off with Valesa. Question for you. Over the last year, we've seen a lot of action in the affordable housing space. We've seen the incoming of modular housing. The federal government brought in the Rapid Housing Initiative. Can you just talk us through what you've seen happen, what has been accomplished?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Michelle. The past year has definitely been exciting and challenging in the world of housing. As a result of the pandemic, we have seen partnerships stronger than ever. All orders of government, all levels of government have quickly mobilized and allocated resources to help people experiencing homelessness across our city, specifically. Pre-COVID, there was an acknowledgement that there was an affordable housing crisis in the city. But with the onset of COVID, I think that has been really magnified. And what COVID has shown is that there are a disproportionate number of individuals from racialized communities, specifically, that are plagued with homelessness, with poor health as a result of homelessness, and housing instability. So what COVID has done was really brought to light many of the issues that we knew were existing. And I think it's really pushing us to address the housing challenges and the homelessness challenges in the city in new and innovative ways, and really through strong partnerships, not only with governments, but with the nonprofit sector and the private sector alike.
Thanks, Valesa. I'm gonna pull Marlene in here. So over the last year, what have you seen change, and what has been a result of that?
Thanks, Michelle. Well, that's a really big question, and I'll just start out with a tiny little precursor, which is really about what our sector, our association, is representing. So much like a Chamber of Commerce, we're representing our membership, who are 700 community housing providers, or landlords, if you want to use that language. And our group represents over $30 billion in assets. So that's with a B. And in combination housing, 500,000 people. So what we've seen in terms of the last 12 months is that there's been a real spotlight on social infrastructure and why it's important, and how it plays a part within a larger system. And so it's really great to be having conversations like this today with some of our sector stakeholders, because we are all part of a housing continuum that is important to our communities. What we saw happen in the last 12 months so far is that we have really underscored that housing is a determinant of health. And if people are housed, they will be successful or more successful in life. And so that has been tested. And in that test, we have seen what we've done really well as a sector and where some of the cracks in the foundation are, so to speak. And so the level of collaboration has been really amazing in terms of how the sector has come together to share knowledge, to talk to each other, and enter into different kinds of partnerships to achieve some of the collaborative goal. We've seen the group be really industrious and be very successful in terms of new development and really in emergency response. And so part of our advocacy work as the association on behalf of the sector is that we've seen there have been over 20 different kinds of supports or programs for both landlords and tenants that have come into play over the last year.
That's very interesting, and I appreciate your perspective of looking at it from this huge group of landlords or housing providers, which certainly represent a huge slice of buildings and homes we have here in Ontario. So Joshua, over to you. What are some trends you're seeing, out of the pandemic, things that may have changed that are different? Some things are the same.
I think, it feels like the pandemic has really just turned everything up, the intensity of everything. So the opportunities, the risks, the challenges. So everything's way more intense. We're working longer days, we're having more meetings, we're trying to do more because we're not commuting. So, there's a lot of opportunities that I've seen that are really exciting, new partnerships that are coming together, which is impressive considering that we can't sit face to face and kind of work out differences and come together and kind of negotiate different issues. I'm also, again, my hat goes off to Valesa and her team. I would not want to be kind of working within the city trying to do all the things that they're trying to do. So I think, it's impressive to see the city roll out all the programs that they're rolling out to try and kind of backstop the need for housing.
Yeah, No, that's a fair point. I would completely agree that it's turned the volume up on problems that have been persisting for decades and decades and decades. But uh, I'd love to pick up on your point around the city having been able to accomplish so much, maybe because of it, maybe in spite of it. I don't know. But Valesa, can you share with us, what has been the city's response, and what's happened so far?
So before the pandemic, we knew that there was a huge challenge facing many residents across the city, hundreds of thousands of households across the city. So in December 2019, a few months before the pandemic, City Council, in acknowledgement of this challenging situation, approved a brand new 10-year housing plan. So that housing plan includes a number of measures to increase affordability for residents, not only through building 40,000 new homes over the next 10 years, but also protecting our existing stock of affordable housing and helping households who are experiencing instability be able to afford rents, for instance. So that was pre-COVID. A few months later, COVID happened. And, what was already a push from City Council became even more urgent. So my team in the Housing Secretariat and my colleagues across the city were tasked with finding new housing opportunities, new housing options within weeks because of COVID, we needed to expand the shelter capacity at the city. So essentially triple our shelter capacity to accommodate physical distancing. And we know that supporting people who are experiencing homelessness is critical. And COVID had shown that having people safely secured indoors was as much of an individual health response as a public health response. And so the city moved quickly to move people into hotels. At the same time, we launched new programs. We launched the modular housing initiative, for instance. So within 8 months, we delivered 100 permanent self-contained modular homes, great homes, by the way. There are some photos available on the city's website if you'd like to have a look. And these homes were delivered within 8 months from the time council approved the project, which, it's record time. So in addition to modular, we really scaled up our advocacy efforts to other orders of government. We showed that it's essentially triple the cost of providing providing a shelter bed than providing a good quality permanent home with support services to help people successfully exit homelessness. So those were some of the measures. So within the last year, the city has actually moved 6,200 people thus far into permanent housing. So a lot is happening. And, thanks to the Federal Rapid Housing Initiative, we're on track to deliver almost 1,300 new homes this year, supportive housing units, that is. So
Wow.
a lot happening really quickly at the city.
And can you just share, just for comparison, year over year, how many new units had the city been developing or through city programs prior to 2020?
So prior to our current 10-year plan, the old Housing Opportunities Toronto plan had an annual target of 1,000 new affordable homes per year.
Mm-hmm.
That target was only met 2 years out of the 10 previous years. Since then, we have approved, for instance, from the beginning of this year to now, which is within 3 months, City Council has already approved 1,500 homes to be built over the next few years. So we're really building a robust pipeline to ensure that we meet our 40,000 unit target by 2030.
Right.
So we're essentially tripling what we've been doing and hoping, with further investments from the federal and provincial governments and with the support of the nonprofit and private sectors, we can do even more.
That's amazing. I mean, it's very sad because the fact that the need is so large means that so many people are in such precarious situations. And I think we can all compassionately imagine how traumatizing it is to experience homelessness. So it's great to hear that the city is thinking not only about housing, but of the supports that are required, so that we can help people have safe, wonderful homes. I'm curious, Marlene, what you think. You've got a really good sense of the nonprofit sector, and you've got an interesting perspective on all of the different players. Why do you think that we were able to move so fast? I mean, was it seems, like, did someone wave a magic wand here? What enabled us to get this done? Because the city said go, and things happened. So talk us through that for us.
Yeah. I think the simplest way to say it is that a crisis or an emergency is the condition for change. And because of that, there was a real willingness to come together as a sector and respond to protect our most vulnerable citizens. And so success is really if we have a housing spectrum where there are lots of options along the spectrum for people to move, with homelessness being on the one end of the spectrum and home ownership on the other. And rental is really the part in the center of that spectrum where we're all playing in rental housing. And there are many different models within the rental portfolio. And so what we want to do is ensure that there are lots of options for people to move along the spectrum by choice and live where they want to live so that they can ultimately be the most successful they can be. And so, Michelle, your question to me was, you had a specific question.
My question was, why were we able to get so much done? Like, what is it about the sector that worked well here? How come we were able to snap into action, in your opinion?
Well, I have to say that our sector is very industrious and has managed to survive despite the system. And I know that sounds terrible, but the system has been very complex, and our housing providers, our members, have learned how to navigate a very difficult funding system in order to deliver that product to the tenant. And so when you have a group of people who know how to change, adapt, think on their feet, and respond, it's a really good and winning formula in a condition like this to address a need.
Right. So you're suggesting that a lot of those in the nonprofit sector are used to rapid change, and so when the city turned the taps on, they were ready to run.
Yeah, not-for-profits also know how to stretch a dollar. So there is a savviness that comes with being able to take what you have and turn it into something more. And I find that the not-for-profit sector, particularly housing, that there is such a passion. It is more than just a job.
Yeah.
People are very, very invested in the work they do because it is meaningful, important work, and you get such commitment and productivity out of the team that's behind the corporation that is the housing provider or landlord, and what they can do with the dollar to deliver a good product to tenants.
Right. Thanks, Marlene. So Joshua, I'm curious from, so Habitat for Humanity, for those of you who may not be familiar, is on the housing spectrum, or is part of, and delivers affordable home ownership, which is a very interesting niche part. So I'm curious, Joshua, what have you seen, come to fruition recently that may have seemed impossible before, or something particularly exciting?
Well, I think what's been interesting. So I've been at Habitat just coming up on 2 years now, and within the first kind of 6 months, we jumped into this kind of joint venture land trust partnership with a supportive rental provider, St. Clair's, and the Co-op Federation. And at first, we sat down as an organization and said, like, how is this going to work? Like, we have 3 different organizations that deliver 3 different types of housing. How are we going to come together collectively to actually accomplish anything? And, you know, we've been working really hard and have a couple projects in the pipeline, you know, within a year of starting up. But what's been interesting is that we all have one thing in common, is we want to see affordable housing built. So we have this common interest, whether we're Habitat or, you know, we're providing shelter services and supports, or, you know, even the private sector, the for-profit sector. We all recognize the importance of a complete continuum and moving people through that continuum. So the other thing that we've been talking about is, how do we move people through that continuum? So how can we get people, you know, from supportive housing to, you know, affordable rental to market rental, and then potentially to affordable home ownership, and then market home ownership. And so that's forced us to look kind of back at the success stories at Habitat, and without even realizing it, you know, there's been scenarios where we've provided home ownership opportunities to families that have been in shelters because of circumstance. So homelessness isn't just, you know, the definition of homelessness, you know, can be, it's much broader than sometimes we remember. And it can be somebody that's improperly housed, they're overcrowded, they're sleeping on a couch, they don't actually have to sleep in their car. So, you know, we're really committed to pulling people off of the housing waiting list, just like everybody else, but we just do it in a bit of a different way. And again, it is a niche, but the equity building opportunity, you know, really, I think, has a long-term impact on people. And we've started to hear those stories and collect those stories. And we look forward to sharing those more with people, where we've heard people going into, you know, coming out of affordable rental into affordable home ownership, and then within 10 years moving out of the city, buying a market unit, and then 5 years later coming back to the city and buying a unit. So really making changes, not just in terms of, you know, the type of housing they're living in, but also their income, because they have that stability of housing.
Right. So a couple of things I want to pick out here. One is the concept of hidden homelessness, that, to your point, doesn't really get thought about often. When we think homeless, we think someone sleeping on the street, someone we pass by holding a coffee cup. But oftentimes it's mothers and their kids, and they're fleeing situations. They're staying on their sister's couch. They're staying, you know, somewhere that probably in the middle, or what CMHC might call unsuitable housing, which is when you have more people than room. So I think it's a really important story to highlight. Something I picked up on, though, that I'd love to get Valesa and Marlene's insight into is this notion of interesting partnerships that have emerged. We've talked quite a bit about nonprofits. We've talked about government. What are some other kinds of partnerships that we're seeing, and how are they? I guess I don't want to lead too much, but what are the results of these partnerships? Maybe Marlene and then Valesa.
Sure. So, you know, a partnership is where everybody wins. And we've seen that our housing providers have complex portfolios. These portfolios don't just have a very pure kind of housing within it, but there might be multiple kinds of housing with multiple funding streams that, when you bundle it all together, makes for a housing development, for example. And so going back to that idea of our sector being very entrepreneurial and very industrious and knowing how to stretch a dollar, a lot of that happens when you match a dollar. So if you are able to go out and find strategic partners that have a similar objective, and then bundle that within a new development, for example, there can be very creative ways of achieving a formula that works for that building, for example. So a provider could have a portfolio where there's a portion of units that are affordable, and others that are deeply affordable, and others that have supports attached to them, and others that are true for market rent. And in combination, the bundling of that portfolio makes the development work. And I think the City of Toronto has done fantastic examples here. And I'm going to pass the baton over to you, Valesa, to really showcase some of the amazing work that you've been doing at the City of Toronto.
Thanks, Marlene. And maybe I'll take a step back a bit. So, in terms of partnerships, at the city, we can't do we can't address this issue without partnerships. It's absolutely essential. Partnerships is the premise of our housing plan. And what we've seen during the pandemic, going back to my earlier point about housing being such a key determinant of health, we have seen partnerships where not only housing providers, and when I say housing providers, I mean, the nonprofits as well as the private sector, um, really come together with health partners, for instance. So the city in 2019 signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the University Health Network through their social medicine program, for instance. And that is, it has really helped the city to mobilize the health resources that we needed during COVID to help our most vulnerable. And that partnership is focused right now on looking at housing opportunities, where we're not only developing affordable housing, but also ensuring that there's the range of wraparound supports to accommodate residents within that housing and residents with a range of needs as well. So that's just one example. Another great example of partnerships is, I would say, Michelle, Woodgreen's recent project in Regent Park. So there was support from the city, Woodgreen being a nonprofit, and Daniels got together, and there will be some great new homes in a condominium in Regent Park for single mothers with children. So another great example. Um, we have also seen through our most recent modular housing projects, our operator is TNG. So TNG brought their property management experience to these modular homes and partnered with CODA, who will be providing a lot of great services for residents in partnership and funded through various ministries. So as Marlene alluded to, um, we're seeing innovation, I think, that we've never seen before. And we're seeing the sector as a whole, and when I say the sector as a whole, I should say the sectors, whether it be government, private, or nonprofit, really looking at a new way of delivering housing to really serve residents. It's not only about building housing, it's about building lives and building communities. And I think, COVID um, has really pointed us into that direction as a society. So I think lots of really good things happening through the pandemic.
Michelle, can I just jump in with just a couple of comments?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So what's interesting for, coming to Habitat, what was the first thing that I kind of realized was the level of partnerships we have with the private sector. So in a portfolio of over 300 units that we were going to be delivering over the next couple of years, over the next 3 years, more than 70% are done with the private sector. That's because of, for example, we have a relationship with Daniels that goes back 20 years, where they've been delivering units to us at below cost. We have benefited from formerly Build Toronto, now CreateTO, a number of units that were, again, condo units, so it sometimes can be difficult to do rental. So we fit into that area really well. And then a lot of Section 37 community benefit deals through the City of Toronto, where the developers haven't necessarily had, they're like, who do we go to, or who can we work with? And we've been really fortunate, a number of developers like Kilmer Group and Diamond Corp, where we've, between Kilmer and Diamond, I think we have more than 100 units between the two of them that will be building or will be provided to us as turnkey. So as much as we love sometimes as a nonprofit sector to hate on the for-profit sector, I think they're going to be a really big part of the solution and ultimately have been a huge part of Habitat's success.
I would agree with that, echo those sentiments that we've gotten to this interesting moment in affordable housing where, We have a federal government who, after many decades, was out of the game, has come in with a national housing strategy and has really set the tone for action for programs, has provided additional funds to the province and to the city to get things done. But it's not like it was for those of you who might not be as much of a housing nerd as I am, or all of us. The majority of the housing stock that we have was built in the 60s, 70s, sort of ending in the 90s. And there were these very generous programs the federal government had that basically provided enough funding to create the building and set up the nonprofits to manage it. But things have changed. The cost of land has gone up. And so even with all of this momentum and all of the enabling policy and all of the programs, we're all in a reality where we kind of need to put them all together to almost stack them like Lego in order to be successful. So it's very encouraging to hear all of you are seeing these great partnerships and have quite a number, more than 2 or 3 or 4 examples to share. I am curious though, I don't want to take us too far away from optimism and positivity, but I'm curious your takes on what are some of the challenges that we continue to face, in spite of all the activity, or maybe even learned from some of the recent action. What's something you see that we really need to solve right now? We can start with Marlene.
Another big question.
No big deal. You can handle it.
When the federal government released the National Housing Strategy, we wrote a 10-year housing plan for the province of Ontario at ONPHA to do an assessment that is backed by numbers in terms of where's the need and how will it get funded. And what we identified is that, now these are pre-COVID numbers, what we identified at the time is that Ontario needs to build 99,000 new units. With that, we also need to maintain the asset, the infrastructure that already exists. Remembering that this infrastructure in many cases has public money, tax dollars that were already invested in that asset. And so there's a real financial position to take in terms of protect the investment that we have and add new housing supply, while we also address more of the systemic issues behind poverty and why that cycle is happening. We know in our work that for every $10 spent in community housing, there are $20 saved across the system when we look at healthcare. So we've all made this connection to housing and health. And the social services and justice systems. And so there's a real argument to be made in terms of protect what we have, make sure we're able to renew our housing stock, make sure that there's enough margin left that we can build more stock to address the need, and then turn our attention to really ensuring that the social system, the infrastructure, is in place to protect our communities from other pandemics or whatever else might be coming in the future. And so being robust in that is absolutely critical for all of us as taxpayers to ensure that we're protecting our communities.
Right. No, that's a very important challenge. I'm glad you raised it. I often think of the analogy of, we can bail out, if we're in a boat and we're bailing out water, which is building new housing, and we're leaking, which is losing all of our old housing, then we're not going to get very far. So I think it's very important. Valesa, what do you think? What are some challenges or one in particular that we need to solve together?
I would say from where I sit, one of the challenges is, so with the current or more recent investments, for instance, the Rapid Housing Initiative, we're building, as I mentioned, almost 1,300 homes before end of this year. And one of the challenges is our nonprofit sector partners who we are relying on to operate these homes will be challenged in terms of their current funding models and their capacity to take these on. So I think that it's crucial that governments really look towards or take action to help the nonprofit sector really expand the capacity. We know the sector is really stretched right now because Most of our partners are out there supporting our vulnerable residents during COVID. And so as we look to deliver new homes, we also need to ensure that our operators are lined up and their staff are able to come in and operate these buildings and provide services within buildings, while concurrently continuing to support our most vulnerable in the homeless system. So from where I sit, that's a very real short-term challenge. And in the longer term, I think I would really like to see the collaboration that has started during COVID continue and scale up. As Joshua mentioned, we absolutely need the private sector as well to jump in and help us deliver these homes. And we need to see all governments continue to work together. So I'll go back to the supportive housing example. So we're bringing all of these units online this year, 1,300 approximately. And while with the support of the federal government, we have the money to deliver the bricks and mortar, we're a bit challenged on the operating funding to provide the supports that are needed currently. So we are actively working with our partners at the provincial governments across ministries, for instance, and really hoping that we will have the supports in place to ensure that these affordable homes are able to be operated as supportive housing. So that's probably, I think, top of mind for me at this point.
Right. No, it's if you build it, will they come sort of question.
Exactly.
Joshua, what do you see as a challenge that we need to pay attention to?
So Valesa touched on it, but there's three kind of key things that keep me up at night. So the first one is, like Valesa mentioned, capacity. There was an interesting study a couple of years back looking in BC at the kind of succession planning of the housing sector in BC and the potential of, a huge segment of the nonprofit sector retiring within the next 10 years. I don't know if a study like that's been done in Ontario, but I'm sure that it's not too different. And, as this money is injected, a lot of it is for capital. So a lot of it is for building new homes. And again, it's easy to justify $1 for a brick, but it's not necessarily as easy to justify $1 for providing that support service. So that's really going to be critical. And having not just supports, but different programs that are available to individuals that need it. The other big thing is money. So making sure that the inflow of money doesn't, ebb and flow, that, through elections, it's not cyclical where we have, we get money turning on for 4 years and then there's a drought for 2 and it's going to be hard for governments to collaborate unless they commit to kind of long-term funding expenditures and programs, and are consistent with, again, one of the big shocks to me today was to hear that the qualifying rate for CMHC was up at 3.94%, which is going to have massive impacts on projects that haven't gotten first draws. It's going to have impacts for a number of different people. And then the last thing is planning, how long it takes to get planning approvals. It's a fight that we've all faced, that we all struggle with. And I think there's tools like MZOs, ministerial zoning orders, which are, I dare to say those three letters. But I think, again, when used appropriately and for the right reasons, can be extremely valuable tools that we need to lean into and embrace. And because we're providing effectively, the nonprofit sector is providing a community benefit, a community service. And if it was a hospital, like we've seen across the country and the world, where they've needed to set up hospitals kind of overnight in parking lots, nobody questions that, that's going to cause too much noise for my home, or there's going to be too much, disruption. You just need it. And it is a crisis. We are in a housing crisis. So we just need to get on with it and stop being worried about offending, people, even though that's just, it's going to happen. And not everybody's going to support affordable housing. So that's just a fact.
Okay, so we've got a lot of work to do. And we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. We've really highlighted what we've seen over the last year, which is a lot of the problems we've had for decades get elevated to the top of the agenda, create a sense of urgency that's gotten 3 times the amount of housing built in the city of Toronto as we have year over year the last bunch of years. It's created new partnerships, new relationships, new ideas. So it's an exciting time. I mean, it's a sad, it's a stressful time, but you know, out of the ashes, we're coming out with some solutions that are long needed. So as we wrap up this conversation, I'm curious if everyone has, you know, for the audience, what's one takeaway you'd love for them to know, you know, around the affordable housing space these days? And I know I've put Marlene on the spot a few times, so we'll start with Valesa. We'll go to Josh and Marlene, give you the last.
Very interesting question, Michelle. There's so much I'd like to say to the audience, but I think we're at a really exciting juncture where we see people understanding the need for affordable housing, notwithstanding what Joshua has just said. There will unfortunately be some opposition to development in many communities, but there's also, I think, more than ever recognition that we need to help our most vulnerable and marginalized people across the city. And what I'd like to say to the audience is building housing and building a better society for ourselves, future generations, and our neighbors. It will take an all hands on deck approach. I want everyone to really take a step back and understand that you do have an important role to play in helping us build a better city, and your voices matter. And I really hope that you will feel the need or feel free to whether it's come to city council or virtual council to listen in or support the nonprofit sector by donating to certain programs. Every little bit helps. And I think, as the recognition that we all have a part to play is my hope for this audience.
Joshua.
So I think there's a lot of passion in this sector in and around housing right now. And sometimes that can flare up. There's going to be days where I don't always agree with the city. I don't always agree with CMHC or the province, and they don't always agree with me. And that's just a reality. But when you look past that disagreement, I think there's something more important there that we can try to focus on, which is that we're all trying to actually do something very similar. There might be different ways of getting there. We might both be right, or we both could be wrong. But ultimately, if we focus on the things that keep us motivated and that we're trying to actually solve, it's always been a really good, I've only been back working in Toronto for 2 years. It's been a very fast-paced environment, but I've been able to cover way more ground by focusing on the things that we have in common and the things that we can agree on, and then try to understand the different perspectives on why we can't do it that way, or why that person's having to go in that direction. And there's going to be sometimes when you win and you lose, and that's just part of life, and you got to take your turn. But I think there's a great group of people working to try and solve this problem. And I've been fairly impressed with kind of what's happened in the last year.
Thanks. And Marlene, what do you think?
Well, I'll just do a shout out to a piece of work that we had done around the Canadian Rental Housing Index. And the reason I mention it is it's online. People can go have a look at their census metropolitan area and get real numbers in terms of where the need is and who the population is. Canadian Rental Housing Index. And what you'll discover is that this isn't just a group of people who are off on the side somewhere, that this is our community. These are people we know. We work with people every day who are not able to afford where they live. And they are making very, very difficult choices on a daily basis around paying bills and feeding families and leading a life. And so my message would be is we all have a responsibility in building better communities and in ensuring that we're building the infrastructure to take care of our society that we are all part of.
Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed. It's been a privilege to moderate, and I love these takeaways. We have a call to action, a reminder that whoever you are, wherever you're doing, you're part of the system. You're a resident. You live in a neighborhood. You work for the private sector. You work for the government. You work for the nonprofit. I don't know who you are, but there's something you can do. And Valesa pointed out, there's going to be a whole bunch of new development. So how can you support these things? Because building on what Marlene said, could be your aunt, could be your uncle, could be you, people who are in need of housing. I mean, I grew up in social housing. Like it's all of us. We all have, different experiences, and it's important to bring that compassion. And then to Joshua's point, we're not always going to win, but we're all in it together. So how do we find some shared objectives and drive forward? So thank you all for a wonderful conversation. It's been great. And we thank HOTT for having us and for making space for this conversation. We know there's many different topics that you could have had us talk about or had other people, and we're very honored that you chose us. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks, Michelle, for doing such a great job moderating our panel. And thank you, Valesa, Marlene, and Joshua, for your very welcome insights and for taking the time to share your expertise with us. It's really been an honor to have you all here to speak on these pressing issues that are impacting us all. I'd like to thank all you viewers again for tuning in. And I also encourage you to consider our panelists' call to action and to reflect on your possible role in solving the affordability crisis. I feel inspired, and I hope that you do too. If you are looking for a way to contribute to the future of affordable housing, our organization would benefit greatly from your support. Thank you.